Hello and welcome to the Psychic Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Naomi White. Naomi is a PR coach and consultant and helps product and service-based businesses to get noticed, be heard and become known through the power of PR. Naomi, hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good, you're very welcome. And I think the goal of today is twofold. It's to have an open and honest conversation about your own mental health journey, but also how the power of PR and your wisdom and skills in this sector can help people to craft and tell their own story, with confidence, and to get some insight into the tools and techniques that have helped you along your way. And by discussing your journey, we hope that to share and normalize these conversations, as often people are not alone in these experiences. Does that sound okay with you?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. So very quickly, big question. Tell us about your mental health journey.
Sure. I say it's quite complex because there's a few things that have happened in my life. As with many people, I think we all go through various highs, lows. I was actually talking to someone today and she was like, I just feel like I'm in the middle, just riding a smooth wave, which is quite a nice position to be in. But I guess a big part of mine stems back to my teenage years when I got Crohn's disease at the age of 16. And it was something that I didn't know anything about. I don't think many people did back then, to be honest. It wasn't necessarily a topic of conversation that was openly spoken about, especially from the medical side of things, but I think from the mental health side of things as well. And obviously when you're 16, it's prime time for you to be going out socializing and partying. And I think I struggled to communicate because I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't really know I had anything wrong with me for about a year. It was undiagnosed. And so I struggled to communicate that with my friends. And so I was kind of known as the one that didn't want to go out anymore and didn't drink. And not that I'm condoning drinking at the age of 16, but yes.
I've heard it's quite fun age 16. but I think on that, did it suddenly just switch on? Because for those listeners who don't, never heard of Crohn's disease, from my understanding, it's an autoimmune disease that affects predominantly the digestive tract, and therefore anything you're eating and drinking, but also stress related is very, basically everything you do on a day-to-day is affected.
Yeah, you've nailed it pretty much. And the symptoms that come with that are severe tiredness. Like I couldn't get through the day without multiple naps, which sounds delightful now. I'd be like, great, I can have multiple naps a day. However, just feeling of general, really lethargic, tired, can't concentrate properly, which obviously at the age of 16, you're doing GCSEs and whatever else you're going through then. So it's very challenging. Obviously the pain comes with it as well. You get a lot of stomach pain and just affects your general day-to-day living. And because mine went undiagnosed for quite a long period of time, it was like you wake up in the morning and be like, oh, for the love of God, what is wrong with me? Like, I just want to feel normal. And I got to that stage as well with when I got diagnosed. I got so low in terms of how I felt so tired all the time. I was like, anything is better than feeling like this. And that's kind of what stemmed I got diagnosed, and then one of the consultants said to me that exercise would be something that would be really beneficial for me. I wasn't very active as a teenager. Wasn't that person that did sports or got chose for the netball team. I was the last one on the bench. But it was something that my consultant recommended. And to be honest, I was a bit like, oh, really? I've got to go to the gym. But it was that point where I was like, I'm at like the end of, I have no other ideas apart from to accept this idea of trying to do some kind of exercise. And I guess that's kind of, where my exercise journey started and spiraled, I'll call it. So yeah.
And you find, so it was almost it was an act of desperation. It was like, I am so desperate not to feel like this anymore that I'm going to basically do something which I've never really done before. And that is exercise. Like you said, it wasn't something that came naturally to you, but because it was a route out, you were kind of like, right, well, obviously I'm going to do this and try it. And you can very quickly see that if you start to see a positive effect as a result of exercise, then that would reinforce those behaviors. But I can also see that can very quickly spiral, like you said, into something that's not necessarily as constructive.
Yeah, I had two choices. I either solved the problem slightly and found a solution, or I just went deeper into probably what was depression at the time, in terms of I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go out with my friends. I couldn't day to day, like living just was a struggle. I didn't have any energy to do anything. I also didn't have the solution at that point, because I'd been diagnosed, I'd been given medication, but it wasn't necessarily working that well. And so, yeah, for anyone that suffers with Crohn's, they'll know it's so debilitating on a daily basis. Until you get to that point where you're in remission and you actually feel like you're making an improvement and seeing changes, it just gets you down every day.
And you said it goes into remission. Is that something that happens sporadically? Is it something that you can control? Can you control the remission by reducing the risk factors, like you said, by exercising, improving your diet, not drinking, etc.? And especially, like you said, as a 16, 17, 18-year-old woman, that's that's times where, like you said, you're going from school to university. It's a very difficult time to announce to new people that this is how I am, what I do. And I suppose, how did you tell your story back then? I'm interested.
Yeah. So essentially, when you're a classic Crohn's sufferer, you go into remission, you then relapse is what they call it. And then, so it's like flare-ups, basically, based on, it could be factors to do with stress. For example, you might be stressed because of work, and so therefore you might have a flare-up. Now, what happened with me, I was quite a unique case, is when I got to the age of first year of university, it would have been, essentially I relapsed. I came off of steroids and all of the other medication, and I was fine for a good period of time. And then all of a sudden, everything started creeping back again. And it could have been the stress to do with starting university, that kind of thing. And my consultant basically said to me, I'm going to offer you an opportunity. There's a 50% chance this will work, and there's a 50% chance that it won't work. So it's totally up to you. And I was like, right, okay. And she said that I could have part of my intestine removed from essentially the inflamed part. And she basically said there could be a chance that a bit of it's left behind, and so therefore you'll still have Crohn's disease and you'll still suffer with it. However, there's a big opportunity that it could potentially solve a lot of your problems. The daredevil that I was, and also from thinking of a perspective of like, I just want a solution, I went down the route of the surgery. And so I guess at university, it was a hard conversation because I hadn't necessarily told anyone that I had Crohn's disease, but then I was going in for this operation. And it was like, okay, now I've got to tell the whole story of like why I'm having the operation. And I did it over the Christmas period. And Optimism told me that I'd be back within like 3 weeks. I'm going to be totally fine. And I wasn't. Like, the reality was, it took me about 2 months in total to recover properly. So there was a conversation to be had around it. I had to tell people then. And I guess I still found it quite hard to communicate, because I think there's a stigma attached to Crohn's disease that people automatically Google it. And for anyone that has just Googled it after listening to me say that, you'll find out what I'm talking about. It's not exactly the most attractive thing to be telling someone in the middle of the street that you suffer with. Like, the reality is everyone suffers very differently. What you see online as common symptoms, not everyone necessarily has. And so it's quite hard to, you try to explain it in the nicest way possible. They then go on to Google and they're like, oh, wow. But I guess I'm kind of waffling here, but I had the operation and I was quite lucky that it worked. And after those 2 months, I then got better and better. And to this day now, I'm not on any medication. So I'm quite lucky. I still suffer from stomach issues, but I'm not on any medication now. So,
so it did work. If that 50% chart, that was a good roll of the dice. And so, are you now, like, do you still classify yourself as having Crohn's, but in a different way, in a much more minor way, or is it just you've got it and the flare-ups are non-existent and you are effectively in remission? How does that work?
It's a difficult one. Technically, on paper, I do have Crohn's disease. So if I have travel insurance, for example, it's something that I have to disclose as a medical condition. But day to day, it doesn't necessarily affect me that much. It's more things like diet I'm mindful of, and I still to this day make sure that I exercise on a daily basis, but more for mental health. And I guess I have to factor in a lot of consideration to things like stress to do with work and things like that. So I still consider it as part of my lifestyle, but I don't necessarily label myself as a Crohn's sufferer, because there are so many other people out there that suffer with it on a day-to-day basis a lot more than I do.
But also, like you said, you did suffer for it. You had this operation and it affected. I think what I was trying to kind of understand was like, it doesn't seem like you let it define you anymore. Where at one stage it definitely did. It was a big part of your story. Whereas now it's not so much a part of your story. And it seems like that perhaps maybe, like you said, as that story develops, some of those hangovers, like you said, the exercise, the food, something. I'd be interested to hear about how that has impacted your mental health and your journey on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't define myself by it anymore. I've done a lot of media interviews on it. If people Google it, I'm sure it'll probably come up. But just to tell my story, I guess from more of a positive perspective, because I think Crohn's is always documented quite negatively in the media. It's kind of like worst case scenario, this person is, I don't know, having part of their bowel removed, or they can't have surgery anymore, that kind of thing. But I feel like there aren't many success stories of people saying, actually, I took a risk and I hold my hand. I was the success story and I'm still living today and quite well. So which
gives people hope.
Yeah.
And you know, and that story does give people hope. So now coming out of that operation, and obviously those second, third of years of university, were they much happier? Did you, because you said it had a profound impact on your mental health, or was there things that you still struggle with that kind of that were formed during that period?
Yeah, I think I missed out on probably the first year of like making, I guess, a lot of friendships, because inevitably a lot of friendships are made over booze and shots and goodness knows what else. But because I still went out, I still consciously tried to make friends, but because I guess from my perspective, maybe didn't communicate it very well for people to understand and sympathize. But also I think people just presume that you're not that like fun person that wants to go out drinking all the time. And so therefore you're kind of labeled as that person, I guess. I also lived at home during university, so didn't help myself in that respect either. But yeah, I think moving into like the last years of uni, I definitely made more of an effort to be part of that experience. But I think inevitably, as you go through uni and you get a bit older, people go out less and you're focusing more on the grade that you actually want to get at the end, rather than the you want to do at the beginning. I've still got friends that I went to uni with, so I don't think it necessarily affected me that much negatively, but I think I probably was that person at uni that people didn't necessarily understand, because I kind of just popped in whenever I wanted to, dabbled in and out, and then I was like, oops, I've had enough, see you later.
But also at the same time, like you went to university for like the prime purpose of going to university, right? Like, you know, there's obviously it was you know, perhaps a great shame, like you said, that you struggled with the socializing the first year, and getting people to accept you for who you are. But I assume you came out of university and you did quite well, and that's actually that's actually what everyone goes for, right? That's the prime thing, and that enabled you to do that. Just a quick question on after you had that operation, were you able to drink and socialize more, or was that something which was always a no-go? Or is it something that still is a no-go?
I definitely go out drinking now.
So go.
It took a while, and I can't say my consultant ever said to me, by the way, you can go and drink now, because she definitely didn't. And I think it's because they don't know the answer, they don't know the effect that it's an individual. Look, try and test. And there are various drinks that I don't drink. I don't tend to drink like beers, really fizzy drinks, for example. So there's like, through trial and error, I've kind of figured out what works for me and what doesn't. Tequila's a winner.
Always is, to be honest.
But no, it's over time I guess I've learned to live with it, and I know that I have limits. Like, I can't go out like a lot of people and get horrendously drunk, because I know that I'll really suffer the next day, and it has different consequences for me. But I guess over time I just kind of learned to live with it. And I go out now, and I don't, it doesn't impact my life now. I wouldn't live my life any differently than if I didn't have it. But I guess when I first had the operation, for a long period of time after that, there was probably part of me that was cautious, because I didn't know what the impact would be. There was still part of me that was like, I actually can't drink because it just makes me feel awful. And I guess I just, over time, I got better and better, and then grew up a tolerance to it, I guess, is the...
And it goes through that thing. It's experimentation, right? It's essentially working out what works best for you. And do you find you mentioned around the exercise as well? That was something that was out of desperation at the time, something that you really pursued. And did that carry on?
It did. Sadly so.
Yes, it did.
I say so. It's everything in life is a blessing and a lesson, I think. And for me, exercise obviously, started from a desperation point of view, and it was the solution to my problems. But I think over time it grew into a solution for disregarding feelings and actually thinking deeply about how I feel and how are things impacting me. And that went all the way into when I was 24, I decided to set up my own company, which is the company that I own today. 7 years strong.
Yeah, which is amazing, right? And very young to be able to do that.
Yeah, so 24, decided to take another leap of faith. But I also was a spinning instructor alongside that. So I taught spinning 3 or 4 times a week, absolutely loved it. And I don't teach spinning anymore. And now looking back on my time as a spinning instructor, and also as someone who loved going to the gym, I have come to realize that actually I used exercise as a way of masking any kind of mental health issues, in terms of I'd maybe be having a hard day, I'd go and do some kind of exercise, or because I was so busy owning a company and also a spinning instructor and also going to the gym and trying to do everything, it didn't give me time to even consider feelings or to consider things that I'm struggling with. I was almost on this like hamster wheel of like treadmill. I just couldn't stop. I just was going. And if I had any time in the day, I would fill it with some kind of exercise. So even if I taught a spinning class in the morning, I'd be like, oh, okay, I've got an hour at like 5 o'clock this afternoon, so I'm going to go to the gym.
Rather than I'm going to reflect on my life for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I thought when I was like 20, I'd say 24 to about 28 was probably, that was how I lived. And it got to the point when I guess I was 28, and I just, because I work in health and wellness, I have all of these things at my fingertips. I have tools, I have coaches, I've got every piece of advice I could possibly imagine. It took me a long time personally to come to realize that actually maybe I did have a bit of a problem with masking my mental health with exercise, that all stemmed back from when I used it as a solution to my problems with Crohn's disease. And it's only through time that I've learned not to do that now, essentially. And I can't think of anything worse than exercising multiple times a day now. But I do very much, I guess I'm very grateful for going through that as a period of my life, because it actually taught me that, we were talking about this previously, but you can try and run from those problems, but they're always going to chase you, essentially. And running was one.
And often a run faster than you. That's how it works, right? Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, again, you always say. So, what's I going to say? With the exercise as well. So, because I can imagine, as you're fresh, let's say a couple of years out of uni, you're 24, you're an entrepreneur, you're a spinning instructor, like you can see how did you get some very positive affirmation for that as well? And where I'm kind of going for that is that actually often when you do, let's say, high intensive exercise, and you look good, you feel good, you're confident, you're running your own business, a lot of people, you can feed off that validation, can't you? Just say that, other people will say, I want to be like Naomi. And that's how you start to live. But when was the stage where you started to recognize that, hold on, despite this validation, I'm not sure I'm as happy as I think I am?
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking.
No, for me, the turning point is my sister actually had my nephew, and she asked me if I would look after him on a Friday. And at that point, my life was, I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd leave the house, I'd get home at 9 o'clock at night. I didn't have any, my diary was not moving for anyone anywhere. And I sat down and I thought about it, and I was like, what is one thing that you do that you're not going to do for the rest of your life? It's not going to define your career. It's not going to see you into your retirement, but is something that you would maybe be willing to give up for the opportunity of looking after your nephew and spending quality time with him. And in the back of my mind, I knew that it was over exercising, teaching spinning. There's still part of me today that would love to still be that spinning instructor and get that ego boost of being on a bike and having a room full of people watching your every move. But for me, I guess I had a wake-up call and the realization that actually, what will I remember when I'm 80 years old? Am I really going to remember sitting on that spinning bike 3 or 4 mornings a week teaching people spinning, or will I remember the memories of family members that I've helped to look after? And that for me, I guess, was the changing point. But also, not just that, that was kind of it's what made me realize that actually there was so much that I was masking by being a spinning instructor and over exercising that I wasn't dealing with, because obviously then I gave up spinning and I was like, I got loads of time.
Yeah.
What do I do? What do I do with the time? And yeah, I guess it was a bit of a wake-up call when I then gave up the spinning, that actually I don't what do you fill that time with? I'm not gonna go to the gym multiple times a day, but I've got like an extra 2 or 3 hours every single day where
what does this world have to offer me other than spinning? Which actually at the time, like, you didn't know, right?
And I absolutely loved being a spinning instructor. For the years that I did it, I got so much out of it. I grew so much as a person. I made so many friends. And for me, I guess being a spinning instructor gave me an outlet of being able to jump on a bike for 45 minutes and be someone different. I didn't need to be Naomi White. I could be whoever I wanted to be. It was like you had this alter ego when you got on the bike, and no one knew you personally. No one knew your story. No one had any judgment about you, but you were this person commanding a room of like 40 people sometimes. And that in itself is hugely empowering. But I guess for me, the realization of actually, like, I'm not being me when I'm on that bike. I'm being someone else, and everyone's getting to know this other person. But actually, this other person, this real person, has so much more to them that I can't unleash because I don't have time to think about things. I don't have time to socialize with my friends, let alone sort out my mental health and everything else that's going on. So it just, it gave me a wake up call.
And I suppose as well, like, it must be quite complicated, because, like you said, on that bike, you've got a mask, you're in character, so to speak, and people are starting to really like and love that character, which makes you feel quite confused. You say, hold on, my social front is here, but I'm here, and they don't reconcile, and that's that's complicated in itself. And in those quieter moments, when you come back at night and you close your door and it's all quiet, you kind of think, well, and the mask slips off. Like, it can be very visceral like that, and it can lead to some thoughts and issues regarding your mental health that people, I hope, will eventually address. So how did you address it? What did you fill your time with?
Good question. I'm probably still trying to fill it now. I think I'll always be on a bit of a journey in terms of coming to, like, even taking weeks off at a time of work. I still struggle with that now. It's definitely a work in progress, but I essentially just dropped everything that I didn't love doing. And I make choices based on, do I actually want to do that? I always use, and I still am a bit like, I am a yes person. I'll say yes to anything, but I now consciously make a choice. I think to myself, like, what is that bringing me to my life? What joy is it bringing me to my life? Do I want to be spending my time with these people at this place? And I guess it gave, in a way, it's a negative, because it gave me opportunity. I didn't have an excuse anymore. People knew I wasn't a spinning instructor anymore. So it wasn't like I could be like, got to get up in the morning so I can't come, or I can't do something because I'm teaching, or I've got an event to do, or something like that. So if anything, it made it harder for me, really, because I didn't have an excuse anymore. I had to almost be more honest about like, actually, I don't want to spend my time there.
Well, I was going to say that's why I was laughing, because actually what you really want to say is, oh, can you come out tonight? Can you do this? No. Why? Because I don't really want to, don't really like you. That's what's going through your head, and you're just like, I can't really say that. Like, but I've got no other excuse anymore. It's really difficult.
And like sometimes, like I'll be honest, sometimes I do make an excuse. Sometimes I'm like, I've got to go pick my nephew up from nursery.
Great excuse.
Sat on
Great
the
excuse.
sofa watching TV just because I want to.
Yeah.
I think I've learned over time, like everyone is allowed to do what they want to do. Like we've only got one life, it's very short, and you shouldn't be subjected to doing things that you don't enjoy. But at the same time, I think it's very important to analyze like why you make certain choices and how you do spend your time, and if that does have a positive impact on your life. Like I think there's a lot of stigma around having to go to the gym now. You don't have to do anything. I know so many people who are like, oh God, I've got to get up in the morning and go to the gym. And I'm like, well, if you're really that sad about it, why are you going? And it's all about finding enjoyment and something that you love. So like if I don't feel motivated to get up and go to the gym tomorrow, I'll book in to go to do a class, because I'd rather do that than feel like I'm doing something for the sake of it. I also, like I said, I obviously work within health and wellness. So I've worked with a lot of coaches. I've got clients who have yoga platforms. I've got therapists at my fingertips. So I speak to a lot of people who have allowed me to have a really big insight to, like, for example, last week, a very good friend of mine is a life coach. And she said to me, can we do a 2-hour session? I feel like I can really help you like reach this next milestone that we've been talking about for a really long time. And I was like, yeah, cool. I'm very open to doing things like that now. Whereas before, I think because I knew I was masking stuff, I was very kind of like, no, don't need any help.
Quite guarded.
Don't need to talk about it. No one needs to know my business, kind of thing. And just through a process of working with various individuals, I've been able to analyze like what my triggers are, what are significant events that have happened in my life that contribute to how I act and respond to people now. And that helps me in every way in terms of work, how I respond to clients. Sometimes if I'm maybe a bit short-tempered, I can sit and think, actually, is that actually me that is the problem here because they've triggered me in some way? All the way into my personal life. Like, for example, I don't know, a friend says something that really pisses me off, and I'm like, is that me? Are they actually valid and they've really annoyed me, or is that just me annoying myself because actually it's something that I haven't dealt with subconsciously? So I think I've kind of spent a lot of time getting to know myself and what I enjoy, don't enjoy, what I have been through, what affects me now, those kind of things.
And I think what, like you said, what underpins that is that understanding of why. Like it's interesting. Like you can answer what very quickly. How comes a little bit. It doesn't, not as quick, but does come quickly. Why is a very interesting. I find it's an interesting word. I'm not sure if it's across different languages and cultures. But you ask why, and you can feel something in your head that's different from the what and the how. And like you said, if you can ask why, and you can take the time to reflect on saying, actually, if I can justify the thing I'm doing and why I'm doing it, generally, if you spent that time doing it, it should lead to an informed decision, maybe in work or life or whatever. But like you said, it's taking time to step back and saying, right, what is triggering me here, and understanding those processes. And it sounds like you're incredibly aware and insightful of yourself now, and that can only be a very positive step. And I wonder how, is it chance? Do we all have to go through different difficult experiences for us to be able to become aware and insightful? Or is there a curriculum? Like you said, you went to a life coach or something. Is it something that we can start early? Like, God, I wish I'd gone to a life coach age 14 or 15 and actually become self-aware, because I've probably made better decisions. But maybe I've made those decisions because of the bad decisions that I've made. It's complicated. What would you have hoped?
I think we now live in a world where it's like mental health is openly spoken about, which I think is hugely positive. I think, when I grew up and when I was younger, obviously you learn from generations before you and how they were nurtured and how they grew up. And I think because we are now, I have obviously gone through this experience myself, I'll be able to then pass that on to my children. So I hope in years to come, we'll be part of this culture where it's openly spoken about anyway, and I think that can only have a positive impact on people. I also think people are now more accepting of getting help as well, which is hugely positive. I think years ago it was seen as such a negative thing to almost admit, actually I'm struggling a little bit. And I think that in itself is something, I guess, that really helped me as well, like hearing other people's experiences and actually just sitting with your friends. Like I've got a lot of friends who are very in tune with themselves. One of my best friends is someone that I can sit and just talk to and have such an open conversation with, and she's probably had the most positive impact on my life. And we were talking about it at the weekend when I saw her for a walk. She was like, think back to like 4 years ago how you were. And I was like, I know, and I don't do this enough. I don't necessarily think back. I like to look forwards, and I don't necessarily appreciate, I guess, how far I've come on my journey. And she was like, the kind of conversations that we have now, we would never have had back then. And I think also you as an individual who is on a journey, we're all on a journey, we're never going to be perfect. You do sometimes have to sit back and reflect on how much you've learned over time. And even me, myself, I don't necessarily do that enough, I don't think. So, yeah.
And praise yourself, right? If you've come a long way, it sounds like you have come a hugely long way, to say, right, I might not be done, like, this journey's never done, but I have made progress. And actually patting yourself on the back sometimes and giving yourself a bit of self-love, because it does seem that a lot of the negativity around it's amazing. You can, the negative chatter that goes on in your head through various triggers, through various things, and that chatter, I mean, it's probably never going to go away. It's probably there for biological purpose at the same time, but it's important to recognize, like you said, what's true and what's not. Now, I'd like to ask, in your professional capacity now, like you're obviously very eloquent in crafting and telling your story and helping clients do that as well. Like, for those of us who are not and are not confident in telling the story, or it comes at it from a billion different directions, like, I'd love to understand, like, how can people simply tell their own mental health story and present themselves in a way that they feel not deficient but empowered and confident?
I always say this, but it all starts from a conversation, and that can be a conversation with a friend. It can be a conversation. You don't ever know who you meet and who you talk to. And that's one of the things that I guess, one of my biggest lessons I think that I've learned through working in PR is that I could be sat in a coffee shop and be talking to the most random person, but unless I'm open and having a conversation with them, they're never going to get to know me, and opportunities don't then arise from those conversations. And so for me, I can tell my story well now because I've told it 100 times, but I couldn't necessarily tell that story easily when I was 16, 17, living through it. It's very much only because I started telling it. And I'll be honest, the first time, I can't actually remember what the first interview was that I did about Crohn's disease, but I ended up writing, no, I do remember, Glamour magazine ran a whole page feature on me as a spinning instructor and how I have Crohn's disease. And that was the first time that I sat down and spoke to them about me, myself, Crohn's disease, how it impacted me earlier in life. And in hindsight, when I did that interview, I was probably still very much in the midst of all of these things, all of the things that I just spoke about, all of the problems that I was having to deal with. But that was probably a defining moment as the cusp of like me realizing actually there's probably quite a lot of things that I need to deal with.
Is that because you could see it on paper and you could hear it, you could read it, kind of go, oh, okay. It was reflected back at you.
And it was a real defining moment. I think when that article came out, I didn't understand the impact, even though I work in PR and I have done for 12 years, and I see clients have an impact on people's lives through telling their story and helping people. I'd never done that personally. And so when I told that story, and then I got random messages on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook from people who also suffered with Crohn's disease, and they're like, oh my God, like, it's just so nice to hear someone else's story and how you've had like a positive experience and you flipped it around. And off the back of doing that interview, I then got contacted by multiple other publications to also contribute my life story. And I guess for me, that unless I'd had that conversation with that journalist and she'd found out that about me and my Crohn's disease and why I was a spinning instructor, maybe I wouldn't have ever gone through the journey that I have today and dealt with a lot of the issues that I felt like I had. And for a lot of my clients who I look after, and that's what I encourage them to do as well. Like, we're all sat on often gold that can help other people, but without those conversations, without being willing to put yourself out there and put whatever into the universe. No, you can't help other people. And we can go through life obviously helping ourselves, but there's a huge amount of gratitude that comes with being able to help someone else, I think.
It's a very powerful, like you said, a very powerful affirmatory and, you know, effect on yourself. And it's those, you're then getting validation and affirmation from a very healthy source, right? From you, right? Like it's as a direct consequence of being honest. And I think a question about being open and honest, obviously I'm a sidekick, massive advocate of being open and honest. A few people have said to me before, they're like, it might damage your career if you talk about these things. Like, my view is, don't bloody care. Like, this is who I am. It's what I'm going to say. Do you think that has any weight to it? Do you think you have to be sometimes careful in how you tell things? And perhaps this is more about the nuance of understanding perhaps who your listener is. Like you said, you did an article with Glamour to understand who those readers are and maybe tweaking it in the language in a way that responds best to them, and not necessarily just closing your eyes and just shouting your story repetitively.
Yeah. I guess it depends who you are, right? If you're a really high profile figure and you have a huge following and there's this real negative story that you don't want out there, then there is probably some consideration as to what you want people to know and what you don't want them to know. But when it comes to things like overcoming hurdles, like maybe, I don't know, one day you went bankrupt after being a super successful business owner, and you want to tell your story of how you overcame that and how you've now kind of built yourself back up. That's something in itself that people won't think of you negatively on, because you've overcome it, you've made it into a positive. And I think it's the same with illnesses as well. There's so many people out there, influential, be it a celebrity or just a Joe Blogs, who have been through such significant illnesses, who to a certain extent you have to suffer alone until you speak out and you're openly telling that story to get the support from other people. And I think when it comes to things like illnesses, business advice, things that genuinely people struggle with day to day, I fully champion telling that story if you can help someone overcome an obstacle that they may well be in. When it comes to things like, I don't know, drugs, sex, alcohol, addiction, those kind of things, depends who you are and if you want people to know that about you. But I do think that, again, we live in a world now where people are a lot more open and accepting that people can change, and you've been through things in your past that actually are a result of potentially things that have happened in much younger years, and so actually you can't blame yourself from going through those things. It's all about how you've overcome it and the solution to the problems that you could potentially help someone else with.
And now, like you said, there's so many over the last few years, like, to talk about mental health, especially in the pandemic, is, you know, it's on the, you know, tip of everyone's tongue. How do we get people to listen? Because I've certainly, maybe it's a personal opinion, but there's a lot of good noise about mental health, and the stories are definitely flowing, but how do we make sure that there's listening ears to that, and those listening ears are actually taking on board what people are saying and actually changing their behavior? Because that's where I feel like the big changes will happen.
Yeah. From a PR perspective, unfortunately, the media is it runs off of the shock factor. So like the more shocking or the more very kind of in-depth story you can tell about yourself, the more they'll be interested in. And because we're so open about mental health and things like that these days, it's sometimes very hard to be shocking. It's sometimes hard to have a very compelling story because there are so many people who are openly talking about the same things, right? So how do you stand out from the crowd? And it's about, I guess it's digging deeper and identifying the deeper layers of, yes, okay, you might have mental health issues, but why is that? Are you willing to tell the story of like how you got to that point? What happened in your earlier childhood? Like, instead of thinking of it as like surface level, dig a bit deeper into the personal story that you have to tell, because as individuals, we're all individual, and no two people have the same story as to how they got to that point. We might suffer with the same things from a mental health perspective, but I guarantee you what you went through when you were 2, 4, 8, 10 will not be the same as the guy down the road. So it's about thinking about the message that you want to put out there, but actually why? Like, how did you get, why and how? Again, those two things that we spoke about earlier.
Simple
like,
words.
What is your journey? Like, essentially dig deeper into it and think about like, what's the unique part of your story rather than the top level, this is what I suffer with. And how you can potentially help people to, by reading that story, they might be able to think, oh, actually, something like that happened to me when I was 12. So maybe that contributes to why I am the way I am today. Like, those kind of conversations are what we need to be sparking so that people can, I guess, start to question who they are and why they do things that they do.
Because like you said, it was a conversation that you had that started you questioning. So, and I think that's I mean, I think I've asked this question several times to friends on the podcast. I've never really got a solution. I actually think this is probably the first time we might have a solution, like to actually, so telling your story in a original, and dare I say it, overused word, authentic way that is unique, it's compelling, and you believe will help people to maybe question themselves and then take that step back and ask themselves why, perhaps for the first time. Now, it's okay if you ask why and you know the answers and you don't want to open that box. That's okay. Like, if it's too painful, fine. But at least you've got an answer to that why. It's too painful. But I'm not going to, I'm going to continue despite this. Which is often very difficult when people have suffered some very, very, very tragic events that have led to some very, very poor mental health, which is very difficult, which is where I think, like you said, professionals can really, really help provide you with ways around those very traumatic events.
Yeah. Like take my story for an example. I could have just been the spinning instructor that had Crohn's disease. Within that story, there were a multitude. It's like an onion, right? We had to dig through and unpeel all of those layers to actually find out that when I was 16, I suffered with Crohn's disease, but actually that had an effect on how I made friends at uni. It had an effect on the way I socialized. I didn't drink at uni, I didn't go out. And then all the way up through my career, how I then masked everything with exercise, because that was the solution back then. Like, they're all the kind of things that digging deeper, I'm like, aha, like I can figure all of these things out. And actually, from a personal perspective, it gave me not confidence, reassurance, I guess is the word, that as to like why I do things that I do. Like, maybe, like, for example, I was talking about this to my sister the other day. I'm so bad at making small talk. So I'll go to an event and I'm like, got a holiday this year then? Like, the small talk you've ever heard, like, what's the weather like? And like, when I think back, I'm like, I think that's probably because I never really put myself in-depth social situations, because maybe I wasn't ready to open up about those things and have those conversations. So it's all about digging deeper in those layers and finding out, the how, the why, the what's, and just being a bit more open and honest, firstly with yourself, and then working out if you're willing to tell that story to help other people.
I suppose, like you said, in those situations where perhaps you said you're not necessarily very good at small talk, or maybe anxious in the social situations as a consequence of that, like you don't need to go with a list about, well, let's talk about a holiday, or damn, it's a pandemic, no one can travel, let's scratch that out. You know what I mean? Like, you can go in and just say, hi, how are you? How are you today?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm all right, quite nervous in this event. Like, and then you're like, oh yeah, me too, actually. And instantly you've gone down a level and you're like, okay, so what are you nervous about and stuff? It's, oh God, I'm struggling. I really want to speak to this person, but I don't know how to, or things like that. And you can get to a much deeper level of conversation very quickly. It doesn't lead to a meaningful friendship or relationship, but small talk doesn't necessarily, like you said, need to be something that you can be scared of. Just asking someone a question, how are you today? I like, things, I like your hairstyle or something like that. There's things that it can really help. Just before we close, I'd love to ask, so now, what would you say is your average week or average day in terms of like, what are the things that you do that help you to kind of stay sane every day?
I still go to the gym and I still exercise, but I actually find a lot of self-satisfaction in telling myself no now. So like, if I go to the gym, rather than using it as like a way of masking things, like for today is a prime example. I have loads of work to do today. I went to the gym this morning. My dog is currently with my mum, so I haven't got that to worry about. But I've got this pocket of time at the end of the day, probably. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, oh, I could maybe fit in a run. But like, reality is I don't need to go on that run. I've already done my exercise today. So actually, what could I do that would actually benefit me more? Because going for a run is just going to make me tired because I've already done my exercise. So I will probably daily, my non-negotiables are go for a walk. When I've got the dog, it's with the dog. I take myself for a coffee often and just sit and do nothing. I did get into a very good regime of doing meditation every day, and I will be totally honest to say that it fell out the door when the pandemic started. I live on my own, so I find it easy to do on my own, but when the pandemic started, I lived with my whole family, and so it was like, no one's meditating there. So yeah, for me, daily exercise, but limiting it and knowing I don't need to almost, I do it for the mental health benefits, and then I don't need to do any more than that to mask anything else. Walk daily. My nutrition is a massive thing for me. So I consider like how I'm fueling my body properly. No, I used to be a bit of a restrictive eater and really be like, I need to be healthy. Now I'm just very much like, what do I feel like eating? I got McDonald's on the way home last night because I really felt like it.
Decent, right?
Do not care. Just like they seem like such basic things, but they're also things that I think in a high volume, over exercising, over walking the dog, over drinking coffee, like we can do all of these things to excess, but it's about having the things in your life that ground you, I guess. And for me, and also talking to friends daily, like I live on my own, so for me that's quite an important thing to consider, is just checking in with my friends. I consciously have to think about, have I spoken to my friends today? And so that's a big thing for me.
And having those, like you said, those balancing effects. You've got these very, like you said, very small, very innocuous kind of activities. They're free, like most of them are free, which I always like to highlight. There's so much you can do if you are self-aware and say, actually, I do like doing this. I love going for a walk. I like going to walk to McDonald's. Great, brilliant. Two birds, one stone. But it's doing these things and saying, oh, I'd like to check in with a friend. Pick up your phone and do it. Like, there's so many things that we can do every day to make ourselves feel better. But the first step is to become aware and insightful of yourself, which can be very difficult, very hard. But you do end up with a kind of, like you said, with a life where you understand why you're doing things, and a life that you're proud of, which can only be a positive thing.
Yeah, and I think the why is always the thing for me that I now consider. I never used to consider the why. I used to just be like, yes, I'll do everything. Even if I was horrendously busy at work and someone was like, oh, should we go to an event after work? I'd be like, yeah, okay. And then I'd be on the way home thinking,
why am I doing this?
I agree to do that. Yeah. Whereas now I'm like, I look at my diary and I'm like, actually, I've got so much on today. I'm just going to say no to that. And so it's always considering the impact and why I'm going. Do I really want to be there? Do I really need to meet that person? Do I really want to go to that exercise class? Do I really want to go for a walk? Like, always just constantly questioning your motive for doing things.
Yeah. And there is something, so like you said, something really, really feels so good when you say no to yourself. And you said no, and you said, I'm going home, I'm going to do nothing. And you get home and do nothing, and you're like, you feel good because it's a good decision. Your body agrees with you. Like, it is good. Naomi, thank you so much for a fascinating, insightful conversation, not only from a personal perspective, but from a professional perspective as well, like helping some of our listeners to kind of hopefully have the confidence to really come out and say, and kind of shape their own stories and to tell their own stories in a way that are original and compelling.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And thank you to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for Sidekick Community or Sidekick Stories and we'll pop up. And please do give us a rating if you like the show. And do check out our free Sidekick app for iPhone and iPad, a collection of interactive exercises, tools and tips to help you boost your mental well-being. The app enables you to build a personalized well-being toolkit, much like how we talked about with Naomi today. To help you deal with life's ups and downs, just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Naomi, thanks so much again.
Thank you.